There we go. I almost got destroyed by the mute button, but we caught ourselves there. Um, I honestly would have to give that one to God because I had a sneaking feeling that maybe my microphone wasn't connected, and alas, I was correct. But welcome back, fellow football fanatics. It's College Football with Sam, and we're going to be talking about a lot of different things today, specifically Penn State's wide receivers, a variety of positions on defense for different teams, Alabama, Georgia, Notre Dame, looking at the Ohio State defense as a whole in a more broad general view, and talking a little bit more about Matt Patricia. I want to visit Oregon's defensive backs, who are the cover and really, I would say, theme of this episode, Texas's and USC's linebackers. Of course, little bit last minute, I actually almost forgot about giving a preview and prediction video for Iowa State versus Kansas State. I think part of that is because I'm a little bit still in preseason mode, trying to get out some of my preseason thoughts, and I have a lot of them that I wanted and want to get to. Many that I actually had planned will have to wait until next year for me to deliver those thoughts in those style of videos, but that's okay. The regular season is just around the corner, so I'm going to give you kind of a warm-up preview for Iowa State. Kansas State going to be pretty short, as many of our previews and predictions will be, and there will not be a deep dive on this one. There won't be more than one video on this matchup, the Aer Lingus College Football Classic. But I do have some thoughts in it. I do have some nuggets to provide for you that I've heard on other shows that really piqued my interest, and I am going strongly one way here. Although it is a Big 12 matchup, so you really never know with these Big 12 matchups. You don't know. So I'm really excited to sit down Saturday and watch this game. Very excited. So thank you all so much for tuning in. Make sure, if you haven't already, to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. Do all of those things. I appreciate them. And also, make sure to go to my channel and look for the podcast tab, and hit the notification bell on any of the team podcasts that you are interested in following. If you want to follow specific teams, don't care as much about, broad college football topics in general, and you want to follow a certain team, well, that's what my team podcasts are there for, and there will be several more right before we kick off. Thank you so much for liking, subscribing. Also, make sure to hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when we go live. And let's start this off talking about Iowa State versus Kansas State. I think there's no better place to start off tonight's show than getting through that topic, and then we will get through some of these other topics. So my thoughts on this matchup are that it's going to be close. There is going to be a lot of ugliness here. Both teams do return a lot of players from their two deep. They didn't use the portal a ton to stock up on their starters, and they have a lot of, probably I'd say, future NFL players coming back. So Iowa State has Dominique Orange as their nose tackle, who's a player I like. Kansas State has Austin Romaine, who per PFF is one of the best linebackers in the country. Sam Hecht is similar, but at center for Kansas State. And Iowa State returns a player in Rocco Beck, to many love at quarterback. Same with Kansas State's Avery Johnson, of course. It's going to be pretty close, I would say. FPI favors Kansas State. The spread favors Kansas State, but only by 3. I think that it is important here, if you are Kansas State, to stick to your identity, to control the game, control the clock, and to exploit the matchup advantage that you've had against Iowa State for years, but have failed to come up against them. That being Kansas State's rushing offense versus Iowa State's rushing defense. If you're Iowa State, I think what you want to do is test out the passing game early. And that's because you do lose a lot at wide receiver, for sure. But you have Chase Sowell coming in from the portal, who had hundreds of receiving yards, 678 to be exact, from East Carolina. You have him coming in. He's been a pretty productive wide receiver for the Pirates. Now he's with the Cyclones. And they bring back, the Cyclones do, they bring back Benjamin Brahmer, who was a pretty good tight end at Iowa State, both in 2024 and in 2023. So I'm excited to watch this game. Very pumped about it. I mean, it starts at noon. That's where it kicks off. It is located in Ireland. Can Kansas State finally run the ball and establish control of the game against an Iowa State team that beat them 29-21 last season? Iowa State beat them the year before that in a game where Kansas State had 45 minutes of possession. It was Will Howard's final game, and Iowa State won 42-35 on a bunch of big plays with only 15 minutes of possession. Iowa State's coming off of their first 10-11 win season in school history, their second Big 12 championship game appearance under Matt Campbell. They made it in 2020, made it again last year, lost both years and were clearly the inferior team, but it's Iowa State, and their expectations are now definitely go bowling every year, and some years punch above that, which is far above whatever their expectations were before Campbell got there. Campbell is a historic coach for Iowa State, and Chris Kleiman is a historic coach in his own right. Won national titles at North Dakota State, won the Big 12 back in 2022, beating the TCU Horned Frogs, who only lost to Kansas State, and the eventual national champion Georgia Bulldogs. Kleiman and Campbell each have their own formulas. Their formulas work. They are unique. Iowa State has that 3-3-5 defense with 3 high safeties that does a really good job of slowing down explosive offenses. It's a defense that I think was built to slow down those Lincoln Riley Oklahoma offenses, and Oklahoma isn't in the Big 12 anymore. Riley is now with USC, but it's a defense that has served Iowa State well. And they've also been a pretty underrated quarterback factory. Not talking about factory as in they're one of the best and biggest and most efficient factories in all of college football, but for the talent they have, turning Rocco Becht into a name that is somewhat widely recognized. And then obviously you have Brock Purdy with the San Francisco 49ers is pretty impressive. Kansas State earned the commitment of high-level 4-star quarterback Avery Johnson, and they also earned a commitment from Lincoln Cure, high-level commitment to 4-star out of high school. I believe Lincoln Cure actually may have been a 5-star. Don't check me on that. But both of these teams have found diamonds in the rough or straight up have taken good players, and they've done a great job of developing them. Kansas State is known for their offensive line, their ground attack, a defense that, like Iowa State's, is also a 3-3-5, and like Iowa State's defense, is pretty tenacious. Joe Klanderman and Iowa State defensive coordinator John Heacock do a really good job. Offensively, Kansas State is stereotypically known as more of a running team, with good enough receivers, or more often the case, tight ends or receiving backs. Deuce Vaughn was like this. Dylan Edwards, former Colorado player, is now like this, where they use their running backs and tight ends and receivers here and there to pass the ball to keep you honest, but they like the downfield running threat. Straight up. That's what they like to do, whether it's Matt Wells now or Colin Klein beforehand or Courtney Messingham. That was their identity. Iowa State, whether under Taylor Mauser, or I wish I knew the guy who preceded him, but they have usually been, from my understanding, they've had some great running backs. I mean, remember Breece Hall. But recently, they have more so operated through their wide receivers in quarterback play. And they've typically had better quarterback play than Kansas State. That's an assumption entering this football game by many, is that Becht is, the better passer, and Avery Johnson's the better running quarterback. And Kansas State will be better at running the ball, probably, but Iowa State should automatically be better at passing the ball. And I gotta be honest with you guys, I don't know how true that is. And I'm gonna give you some numbers to back that up. So Avery Johnson passed for 2,712 yards last year for 7.3 per carry. Now, Rocco Becht passed for hundreds of more yards, almost 1,000 more yards than Avery Johnson. But Avery Johnson had 372 passing attempts. Becht had 456 with 3,505 passing yards. Their completion percentage was in the high 50s, both. Johnson at a 58.3%, Becht at a 59.4%. Becht's average was a 7.7 yards per pass attempt to, again, Johnson's 7.3. Becht had 25 passing touchdowns. Same with Johnson. Johnson had one more interception with 10. Becht with one less than Johnson, one fewer than Johnson at 9. Johnson took 13 sacks. Becht took 15. Both their passer ratings were in the upper 130s. Their QBRs were literally close to identical. So Becht's was a 69.4, and I believe Johnson's, off the top of my head, was a 69.7. Yes, double check that. Thank you, ESPN. Johnson had 605 rushing yards for 7 touchdowns, and Becht had 318 for 8 rushing touchdowns. He had Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, who were receivers that both had 1,100 receiving yards or more and 8 or 9 receiving touchdowns, depending on which. Noel got picked in the 3rd round, so a day 2 draft pick. Higgins was picked in the 2nd round, also a day 2 draft pick. And I think at one point, one of them may have been getting 1st round buzz. Those are historic receivers, historic for Iowa State. They are both gone. Their tight end, Gabe Burkle, is still with the team. And Burkle, along with Benjamin Brahmer, I think will make up their best threat through the air, along with incoming transfer Chase Sowell with, again, 678 receiving yards, 3 receiving touchdowns, average nearly 20 yards per reception. But it is still a pretty big downgrade from what they had. And meanwhile, Kansas State, their best wide receiver last year, Jace Brown, who had 823 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns, he's back. Garrett Oakley, their best tight end, he's back too. He had 5 receiving touchdowns. Keegan Johnson is gone. DJ Giddens is gone. But DJ Giddens was a running back, 1,300-yard running back. They have Dylan Edwards. They have Joe Jackson back there. I'm curious to see how these teams potentially change compared to their styles last year. I don't imagine they'll veer too far from it. But Iowa State returns Abu Sama III and Carson Hansen. Kansas State loses their star running back, but Kansas State also brings in some talented receivers, and they return their best receiver. They also bring in Jerron Brandley from Boston College, who had a productive 2023 year before I assume he got injured, and Jerron Tibbs played with a Purdue team that had no talent, no quarterback play, no defense. Somehow got 305 yards and 2 touchdowns. I imagine he'll be more productive in a Kansas State offensive system and overall team that's far superior to Purdue. And you're not playing the same demoralizing, tough schedule that the Boilermakers had to play last year. Big Ten slate plus Notre Dame. Yikes. I mean, they played the 2 teams that played for the national championship, including 2 teams who played in the Big Ten title, Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State, Notre Dame. Don't want to get too carried away here. But offensively, both of these teams return pieces in areas which they were weaker and lose a lot in areas which they were stronger, with, I would say, the exception of Kansas State to a lesser degree. Because with what Kansas State brings back at receiver and with Johnson returning, both QBs returning, but what Johnson's more comfortable with, plus his natural talent, leads me to believe that this year, I would say there's a higher probability that he'll be a better passer than Becht will be a better passer than him. Receiver is more even than it was last year. Last year, Kansas State outgained Iowa State, but due to it being in Iowa State, at Iowa State, and not a neutral field like this matchup, and also due to the fact that Kansas State had 2 turnovers, so Iowa State was +2 in the turnover battle, Iowa State won 29-21. Well, now here we are. It's neutral field. Kansas State, I think, returns more of what you want to bring back on offense. than Iowa State does. And you look defensively, they return Austin Romaine, Kansas State does. Linebacker who had 2 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, is rated by PFF as one of the best in the nation. They bring back VJ Payne, great safety, senior player. Desmond Purnell is another running back to pay attention to. And Cody Stufflebean, along with Chidi Obezor, are a great defensive end edge duo in the Big 12. Like, that is one of the better defensive fronts right there in the Big 12. Iowa State, for example, they have Dominique Orange at nose tackle, a big guy who can really soak up blocks on the interior. 325 pounds, 6'4". Love him. Have questions a little bit about their defensive ends and other players in the line. They did lose one of their star players there to Texas A&M. Returning Caleb Bacon, redshirt senior, is huge. And I would say Jeremiah Cooper coming back as well at strong safety. That is a player to pay close attention to. 2 interceptions, 8 passes defended last year. Kansas State's favored by 3. They're given a 62.3% chance to win this game per FPI. Kansas State has, I would say, the more talented roster by virtue of returning some of the players they do on the defensive front, returning Sam Hecht at center. Getting J.B. Nelson at guard from Penn State in the portal was a very underrated pickup by them. They also got George Fitzpatrick, who the staff was raving about, but I think he unfortunately suffered an injury. Won't be playing for this year, or at least won't be starting, if my memory serves me correctly. Look, J.B. Nelson was pretty good for Penn State last year. Just couldn't start because he was playing for a pretty good offensive line that's interior was much stronger than its tackle core last year. I expect Penn State to field the best offensive line in America. So Nelson being a player that was starting in different roles for that unit last year, now coming down to the Big 12, I wouldn't be shocked if he was one of the Big 12's best offensive guards. And you already have Sam Hecht at center. I don't think Kansas State will have problems running the ball. What about stopping the run? We'll have to see. In theory, they should have the run defense and rush offense edge over Iowa State, but Iowa State returns their 2 backs, and last year Iowa State actually punched with Kansas State in the ground game. Kansas State actually had the higher average yards per attempt in that matchup, but Iowa State, with special teams, with earning a safety, and also by virtue of being at home, ended up emerging victorious in this matchup. Last thing we'll talk about before we move on, and I give you my prediction here, is the special teams. So Luis Rodriguez is a place kicker for Kansas State, coming in, transferring from College of Canyons, where he played last year. Iowa State returns Kyle Conradi, who made 75% of his field goals, 21 of 28 field goals. He had a long last year of, I think it was in the 40s or maybe 50s. I know he hit a long field goal, a couple of them against Iowa, to emerge victorious in the Cy-Hawk Trophy. Makes 95.8% of his extra points. I would say that Iowa State probably has the special teams edge here, returning a reliable kicker, not getting one from the portal, and Tyler Perkins has been there for quite a bit at punter. Meanwhile, Kansas State has a redshirt sophomore, Simon McClannon, who, forget if he started there last year or not, but I think that at the end of the day, Iowa State has the special teams edge. Kansas State, I would give them the edge on offense here, passing and rushing. As for defense, I'd probably give it a push in pass defense. I would give run defense and pass rush to Kansas State here. I think that Kansas State's the better team. I like Kansas State's coaching staff more. I think Kleiman is a better coach than Matt Campbell. It is close, and Campbell's a good coach, but I do like Kleiman just a little bit more. I think that the spread, so the books, and also ESPN's FPI are pretty right here. It should be a close game, but a game that Kansas State wins more often than not. They're not playing Iowa State on the road. Iowa State no longer has the necessary receivers to win with a bunch of big plays with only 15 minutes of possession. It's not on the road, and Kansas State isn't starting an inexperienced quarterback with limited receivers like last year, so therefore you lose the turnover battle. I think a lot of things go Kansas State's way in this game that they haven't in previous Farmageddon matchups. So I will be going with Kansas State -3 is the play. They're either going to win by 3 or more than that. And I'm taking Kansas State, obviously, to win if I am picking them to cover. Kansas State is going to win by controlling the ball, controlling the clock. I think they will win the turnover battle. I don't know if you're straight up going to see them win the passing yards battle or the yardage battle or anything like that. I want to see these teams play just with all the changes they have. Yes, there's some familiarity, but there's changes, and these games have been very close and very competitive. The Farmageddon rivalry has been in recent memory. So I don't know exactly how Kansas State's going to win or if Iowa State wins. There's so many different pathways these teams could take to win. But I do think Kansas State's going to surprise college football a bit by fielding the more effective passing offense. They're going to, I think, outrush Iowa State, perform better than Iowa State on the ground. And I think they're going to have an easier time getting to Becht than Iowa State will getting to Avery Johnson. So even though Iowa State has the special teams advantage, and they've won, I think, 4 out of 5 against Kansas State in their last 5 matchups, I think Kansas State gets it done here. All right, let's check the comments section after that one, the live chat, see what you guys think about this. Looks like not too many people are talking about this. Oh, well. Someone says they think Kansas State wins in a close one. I do agree with that. I think that Kansas State's going to win here by anywhere from, I would say, 3 to 10 points. Just with college football, one play could be a touchdown. So it wouldn't shock me if Kansas State wins by anywhere from 10, which is the lowest possible double-digit number, to 3. I would be shocked if Kansas State wins by more than that, or if Iowa State wins by more than 4 points, because I do genuinely think Kansas State is, I would say, significantly better. But it's a Big 12 matchup. It's both teams' first game, and there is going to be a lot of hiccups, understandably so. I don't think either of these teams are going to come out and they're going to have their hair on fire and they're going to play at their A+ performance. I could be wrong there, but returning production is at an all-time low in college football, so I would guess that that will correlate some with teams this year in general starting slower and just having a bumpier ride in general. I now want to talk about the Alabama safeties. I want to talk about this safety room for a few minutes. We'll move on from there and get to Georgia, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Texas, and USC. We'll do all these things. And then last but not least, before we resume, we're going to go live with Corn Crazed tonight on his channel. 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 7:30 p.m. Central Time for you Cornhusker fans who I love very much. Love all fans, but Cornhuskers have done very special things for college football, what Sam Cornhusker fans have, and Corn Crazed and I, well, we love to collaborate. I love to go on his channel, and I want to get him on my channel some point during the season as well. Fortunately, we're going to be joining him tonight. Again, his channel, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. In fact, why not just link it? I'm going to pin it in the live chat right now. That way you guys can hit the notification bell for when we go live. And yeah, you can do all that stuff. So let me let me link this. Let me link it right now. Pin it to the top of the chat. So here you go. That is the live show that I'm going to be on at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, 7:30 p.m. Pacific Time. Not Pacific Time, but Central Time. 5:30 p.m. Pacific Time. 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. I'm very excited to be on there. We're going to be talking about Nebraska. I've made some changes to my Nebraska prediction that I'm probably going to get to on his show. So if you're interested on my thoughts on Nebraska, not just corn crazed, but if you want to listen to both of our perspectives, well, we're probably going to be talking about that tonight. So make sure to be there. But let's get to these Alabama Crimson Tide safeties. The Crimson Tide safeties are rolling. And they're rolling because they return a bunch of experience, a ton of talent, and they have momentum. They surprised a good portion of experts and analysts last year with how they played and progressed as the season went on. This is a strong Alabama secondary as is, but today I want to focus on the safeties and their leader, Bray Hubbard, in a defense led by Kane Womack that is different from the prior Saban defenses. No longer running a 3-4, no longer running the Saban defense. You're now running more of that 4-2-5 nickel defense as Alabama moves on from Saban, makes some changes not just offensively but defensively. And Alabama had a top 10 defense last year in efficiency, and this season there are some who are picking them to be the number one defense in football. I can't blame them for that. In fact, I can see myself agreeing with that statement. I think that this unit is very athletic. They have several NFL players. We could talk about Deontay Lawson. We could talk about Qua Russo. We could discuss Damani Jackson. But I want to look at the safeties here. That's what I want to pay attention to. And we already mentioned Bray Hubbard, strong safety for the Crimson Tide, 89.2 PFF grade with 420 about snaps, 3 interceptions, and 2 passes defended. Free safety, 64.4 PFF grade with Keon Sabb, the starting free safety, 455 snaps, 2 interceptions, and 4 passes defended. Transferred in from Michigan, had some ups and downs, but overall had a pretty good year for the Tide last year. His backup, Xavier Mincy at free safety, had 122 snaps last season with 2 passes defended and a PFF grade in the 70s. Dre Kirkpatrick Jr. only had 19 snaps. He's going to be the backup strong safety to Bray Hubbard. And Cameron Howard at free safety, 58.7 PFF grade with 23 snaps. This is a pretty deep room. We're not including safety here with nickel. We're not bunching those together. So I'm talking about 2 positions here, and they have some depth, they have age, they have experience, and they have players like Keon Sabb, for example, who have an NFL body, and Bray Hubbard does too. So there's a lot of depth, a lot of passes defended, interceptions, good play coming back. It was year 1 in a new system. Because remember, you had some transfers like Sabb incoming transferred. Hubbard and some of these other guys were recruited by Saban. However, it's still a change of the guard, change in systems, change in culture. They're now entering year 2 with those changes, and the vast majority of them started last season. Keon Sabb and Bray Hubbard started. Xavier Mincy played for the first time ever for significant reps. They're all of them are coming back. All of them are. So that is a positive. I only think this safety room and really this defense overall is going to get better and continue last year's momentum. Where, look, Alabama's defense at the start of the year, Vanderbilt, for example, I would mention USF. I know they held USF to a bunch of field goals, but USF was still able to march in between the 20s on them. Think about Georgia and how Georgia made that comeback, nearly did, before Alabama took it away from them at the last second with Jalen Milroe to Ryan Williams. The defense started off rough, but really after that Vanderbilt game, they took a turn for the better. The defense wasn't why they lost to Tennessee. It wasn't why they got destroyed by Oklahoma. If Alabama doesn't turn it over against Oklahoma, they probably eke out of there with a win and are in the college football playoff. The defense was much stronger than the offense at the end of the year, and in part because of the safety room where, look, they're going to get better at coverage, and based on what they return at all other parts, this defense is probably going to get better at every position, which is rare in today's age of college football. With the transfer portal, with constant coaching changes, there's a lot of ups and downs, a lot of inconsistency, a lot of title changes in the sport. One area that I think is going to embody stability this year is this Alabama defense. And I actually think, once again, it will be better than the Alabama offense. It's a big part of the reason why I am picking the Tide to win an additional game compared to last year and reach the college football playoff, on top of the fact that I think their schedule is a little more workable than some might believe when you initially view their schedule with a naked eye. This safety room is going to anchor this pass defense. It's going to anchor this defense overall. They tackle well. They're athletic. Their coverage is going to improve. What's not to love about this Crimson Tide safety group? Up next, I want to talk about Georgia's defensive line. This is a massive unit, this Georgia defensive line is. And they do lose key players. I mean, Mykel Williams was a first-round NFL draft pick for a reason, and there are questions here, but they are big. They are impactful. When I look at their depth chart, I'm not concerned really with how young it is, because they are uber talented. They're very talented. I mean, they may have a freshman. They may have a freshman in Elijah Griffin play significant reps this year, and I think that he will do well. I mean, if they're going to play a freshman, Georgia will play them because they have to at points. But with how they've recruited on the defensive line, if they're playing a freshman significant reps there, it's going to be because he's good, not because they desperately have to play him, if you know what I mean. Georgia's defensive line, once again, is going to be at the top of the sport. And that is because of players such as Christian Miller, who I view as a potential first-round pick. In fact, I'd say likely first-round pick in the 2026 NFL draft. And also someone who could be the best defensive tackle in all of college football, competing with Peter Woods and Zane Durant and others for that spot. I also love Jordan Hall, Gabe Harris Jr., Joseph Jonah Ajanye, and that's their starting defense, but they're deeper there. They brought in Elo Madozi from Army. Elijah Griffin is a true freshman from Georgia. Not that that really matters. All that matters is that he was elite and also happened to be from Georgia. Georgia typically produces tons of elite prospects. I think they're the hottest high school state right now in terms of talent production and leveling up their talent production. They also have Xavier McLeod in that defensive tackle group and Justin Green at defensive end as well. This is a unit that is going to get after opposing quarterbacks and that is going to stuff you in run defense. They will not be the reason why you beat them. They won't. If you are going to beat Georgia's defense, if you are going to gash them, you will have to go over them. You will not be able to go through them. Think about Notre Dame last year. That was one of the worst games I think Georgia's ever played under Kirby Smart. Just the lack of fundamental soundness, losing on special teams, looking as inconsistent as they did, and credit to Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman for beating Georgia and Kirby Smart. However, Georgia in that game completely stuffed Notre Dame's ground attack, and they handily beat them. Their defensive line handily beat Notre Dame's offensive line. But Notre Dame had the superior passing attack when it mattered, and they won the special teams battle and the turnover battle. And those are big, important things. You look at their game against Texas in the SEC championship game in regular season. They shut down Texas on the offensive line. Texas couldn't run the ball at all, so then they were put in an uncomfortable position where they had to put Ewers in and have him throw at a much higher volume than he's used to, and that Texas wanted him to. Again, circling back to the interior of this line and Christian Miller. He had an 82.2 PFF grade with 385 snaps and 1.5 sacks. Georgia doesn't return/bring in a lot of sacks. They don't have a ton of returning production there. But they also have some at linebacker, which we're not talking about today. However, given how they recruit, top 100 players in abundance, 5 stars in abundance, given how they develop who Glenn Schumann and Kirby Smart are as defensive minds, I'm not concerned even with the fact that Jordan Hall's a 44.9 PFF grade with 49 snaps, or that Joseph Jonah Ajanye doesn't even have a 60 PFF grade with limited snaps. I have some concerns as to whether maybe those players will be some of the best in America or not, but they have Christian Miller for that. Gabe Harris comes back with 2 sacks, just under 200 snaps overall and a PFF grade in the 60s, and Elo Madozi at a 74.3 PFF grade coming over from Army with over 500 snaps. And that's not even talking about players like Xavier McLeod, who will be in the 2 deep, or Elijah Griffin, or Justin Green. You also got to think of Nnamdi Ogboko and Nasir Johnson at defensive tackle and nose tackle. This is a deep unit, and the way they recruit and develop and how they've produced, I think earns them benefit of the doubt over other places that might return more or even did more in the portal, for example. So Oklahoma returns more on the defensive line, but do I think at the end of the year it will be better than Georgia's? Probably not. What about Alabama? Same thing. They return more, but I would trust Georgia there more at the end of the year. Michigan is another one of these schools that deserves a lot of benefit of the doubt for how they've developed on the defensive line, not offensive line. Though they've done well there beforehand, but not nearly as well as the defensive line. I right now will tell you that Georgia's starters will probably be better than Michigan's, and they return similar amounts of starters on their defensive line. A lot of that has to do with recruiting, but Georgia, I would give benefit of the doubt on their D-line over several defensive lines. Several. And for example, Michigan brought in 2 okay transfers at D-tackle, and they return a lot of guys whose PFF grades are dramatically higher than several of these Georgia guys. Dramatically. That's why I list PFF a ton, because it gives a perspective, and very smart people run that organization and give grades out there. But you do also have to give it a grain of salt at times, and you can, if you believe in a staff or a certain player, you can project and make different assumptions. You can do that. And I'm doing that with Georgia here. I think that this defensive line will be among the nation's best. It'll be up there with Clemson, with Penn State, with Michigan, Oklahoma, Oregon, if they explode at D tackle with what they bring back at DN, they could have one of the nation's best D lines. It will be up there for sure. And how this plays in with the schedule that Georgia has. Georgia minus 235 to reach the playoffs, plus 290 to win the SEC. They're only behind Texas in those categories. They have a very advantageous schedule. A lot of home games, 2 neutral field games, only 3 true road games. In all 3 of those true road games, their D-line will have an edge over the opponent's O-line, with maybe the exception of Auburn. Maybe. I could see Auburn with their O-line and what they have there maybe matching Georgia at times in the trenches. That's it, though, and Georgia will be much better than Auburn. I don't care what that podcast who went viral said. Georgia will be several touchdowns better than Auburn. Doesn't mean they'll win. Upsets happen, and it's a rivalry game in the hornet's nest that's Jordan Hare, but Georgia will be several touchdowns better neutral field, I think. Alabama, I think that there's a chance they have a trench edge there with their D-line superior to Alabama's O-line. In terms of experience and talent, Alabama should have an edge there, but I do not have the same trust in Alabama and their team with O-line that I do with Georgia and defensive line. They will kick Ole Miss's rear in the trenches. With Texas, there's enough inexperience on that line, and the line is thin enough to where I think Georgia will probably have an edge with their D-line over the Texas O-line. Florida, if healthy, and Georgia Tech, if healthy, are 2 teams on the schedule who could have a trench edge over Georgia with their O-line against the Bulldogs' defensive line. However, neither of those opponents are on the road. They get Florida off of a bye and have superior coaching to Florida. And they don't get Georgia Tech off a bye, but they play Charlotte the game prior. and they have a huge talent edge over Georgia Tech. And with where that neutral site game is played in Atlanta, I bet you the majority of that crowd will be Bulldog fans, and it will be a de facto Georgia home game. So I believe strongly that Georgia's making the playoff. And I think in large part of it is because of how the schedule aligns. They don't play, in my mind, a top 5 team outside of Texas all season long. And they get Texas later in the year when I imagine some injuries could pile up. And Texas is thin enough on the O-line to where if they take one more injury after their backup right tackle went down, that with the depth Georgia has and how Georgia matches up well with Texas, they should be favored to win that game. So there's a lot of optimism around Georgia, at least from me. I'm more confident in Georgia this year than I am in Oregon, Texas, and Ohio State in terms of utilizing their talent to its ceiling because of Kirby Smart, because of their history. Schedule plays into that a little bit, but it's really Kirby Smart and also this defensive line. I still think that, Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State will have good defensive lines at varying degrees, but I think Georgia and Texas are a step ahead of the other two on defensive line right now, and I do trust Georgia's staff and what they have overall to better utilize their talents. So this is a unit that will wreck a bunch of offensive lines, a unit that will get to the quarterback, that will not be held in check. You will have to mitigate and scheme around this Georgia defensive line. You will not be able to go through this Georgia defensive line. Now we can discuss the Notre Dame cornerbacks. Talking about Leonard Moore, Christian Gray, all these different players. Notre Dame's entire situation this year is one that I am very curious about. Oh, Max Ellis, let me answer this in the chat before we move on. Georgia's D-line versus Alabama's O-line, which do you prefer, Sam? In terms of raw talent and potential, you'd probably take the starting Alabama O-line over the starting Georgia D-line. From what I project is going to happen in the regular season, I would take Georgia's defensive line, and Georgia's defensive line is also significantly deeper than Alabama's offensive line. If Alabama's offensive line loses Caden Proctor, the entire unit falls apart. They will never be the same. They won't rebound. It'd be like Ohio State losing Josh Simmons, where if you do anything after you lose him, it's more because of how you've mitigated it and not because the unit's reloaded. With Georgia, they wouldn't totally reload if, say, they lost Christian Miller to injury, and I hope none of these players get injured. However, Georgia has recruited and developed at such a level to where they will more easily play plug-and-play with the defensive line than Alabama will with their O-line. And a lot of that's the nature of college football, too. Offensive lines, you don't want to rotate them. You want chemistry. You want that in-game bond. With defensive lines, that's the position you rotate the most in football. So, really, you should like the depth of any defensive line over any offensive line if their recruiting is equal, because one is going to get more snaps and have more experience throughout the depth chart than another, usually. Maybe that's an incorrect assessment, but that intuitively seems to make sense now that I've talked to myself through it. Let's talk about these Notre Dame corners, though, and then move on, because I got to be honest with you guys. I made this video thinking, or these graphics thinking that I'd really love to talk about it, but I'd prefer to talk about Notre Dame's entire defense, not just their corners. This will be a pretty short segment here. Leonard Moore and Christian Gray return after having phenomenal seasons for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, assisting Al Golden and his highly effective, highly efficient ball-hawking defense to the national championship game. Notre Dame, we all know how the story goes. They went 14-2. One of their losses was to the eventual national champions and the number one team. The other loss was to a MAC school. They beat everyone else, mostly with stifling defense, winning the turnover battle, Riley Leonard avoiding tons of sacks, and Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price gashing everyone in the regular season and doing just enough in the postseason, even with some health issues and facing much tougher defenses, to help Notre Dame win football games. So what does this cornerback look like in 2025? How can it impact the team? And will they face any challenges in the regular season? Any wide receivers, any passing attacks that can really push these corners? Well, let's discover that. So first, before we get to the schedule, I just want to briefly overview these corners here. So you got Christian Gray and Leonard Moore, Christian Gray being the field side corner, Leonard Moore being the boundary side corner. They come back, and Moore last year, a true freshman, 3 interceptions, 9 passes defended with 736 snaps, an 88.4 PFF grade. Impressive. He's one of the best corners in America as it stands right now. So is Christian Gray, not quite to the same degree, but 64.2 PFF grade with 796 snaps, 2 interceptions, and 11 passes defended. They bring in nickel Devonta Smith from Alabama. Carson Hobbs last year played some. He looks to be the backup nickel. And they have 2 true freshman corners in Cree Thomas and Dallas Golden, who will be in that 2 deep behind Leonard Moore and Christian Gray. I imagine they will get some reps, just given the sense that both of them, as of right now, are projected to be the second-string corners behind Gray and Moore. Not much to say about this room other than they do their jobs, and they do them pretty damn well. This is one of the best starting corner duos in America, if not the best. Depth, I would say, is a concern here, but that will mostly flare up if a game is hyper-competitive and or more so if there are injuries that occur in this corner room, which I hope and pray don't happen. This schedule, though, is what I want to focus on in this video because we all understand the premise that Notre Dame's corners are great. I think everyone who does their research knows, yeah, I would want to have Leonard Moore on my team starting at corner. I don't think there's any team who wouldn't start him at one of their corner positions. Could be wrong, but I'm trying to peel through the list. I don't think so. I think every team, Penn State, I love their corners. I think Leonard Moore would be starting along with A.J. Harris. Georgia, team with wonderful corners. Ohio State, they have a lot of talent in their corner room. Alabama has some underrated corners who should get better from last season. Texas, I can't think of a team that wouldn't employ one of or both of Christian Gray and Leonard Moore's services. But let's get to the schedule here. So week 1 at Miami. I don't think Miami has an individual receiver that will directly challenge these corners one-on-one. Doesn't mean they won't beat them here and there, but they probably won't win on an average basis against them. There's no Jeremiah Smith from Miami. There's not even a Xavier Restrepo. They downgrade at wide receiver. Doesn't mean Miami, again, won't have success in the passing game because there's safeties, linebackers. There's whether or not Notre Dame can or will try to get pressure. There's Carson Beck and his poise. There's also something called a wide receiver can be covered perfectly by a corner, but the quarterback throws the ball in such a way that it's still a completed pass. Miami's one of these games that I'm very excited to see how Notre Dame performs. It's a huge test for starting quarterback CJ Carr. I don't believe, though, that Miami is going to have wide receivers that will consistently beat these corners. So I would say, no, they're not going to be challenged here pretty often. With A&M, they lose Noah Thomas, but they bring in Casey Conception and return Terry Bussey. With the talent and proven experience that both of those guys have, Bussey has some experience, all the talent in the world. Casey Conception, when healthy, is a very proven player. I would say here they're going to face a challenge. I think one of those players is going to be good enough to match these corners in terms of talent and efficiency. Purdue, no. Arkansas, no. Boise, no. NC State, no. USC in week 8, yes. We saw this last year where USC almost won the game despite not being able to stop whatever Notre Dame wanted to do. I mean, they could not get Notre Dame off the field. Notre Dame ran for whatever they wanted to. They passed for whatever they wanted to. Yet USC almost won. Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane, and potentially given the development that Dennis Simmons, their wide receivers coach, has in his track record, potentially a third option, will probably beat one of these corners very consistently, and Makai Lemon could beat both of them. That's how good Makai Lemon is. Not saying USC's going to win, but they will face a challenge against USC for sure. And at Boston College, Navy at home, Stanford, Syracuse, Pittsburgh, no. I would say the only challenge these corners are going to face in a game that you should watch, you should circle. I mean, you should circle A&M and Miami and USC. Those are the biggest games. But really, and Pittsburgh has some good receivers too, but Notre Dame should lock them down pretty well. The USC game is going to determine whether or not this secondary and defense is at the same level or better than last year's unit. That's going to be the game that determines it. Because if Notre Dame wants to win a title with how much turnover they've had, they're probably going to have to get better in pass coverage against the teams that have legitimate receiver threats. Last year, if Penn State had Carnell Tate, they probably score several more points against that Notre Dame defense. They were acing them on the ground. Once Notre Dame figured out they couldn't pass, they were able to kind of lock up that offense more. But if Penn State or Georgia had a more dynamic offense, they were not going to beat those teams. And we all saw against Ohio State, it was 31-7 at some point. Ohio State was inconsistent all year, in large part because of their offensive line. And also, their corners were pretty shaky. So once Notre Dame had to only throw the ball, they exploited that a bit with Jaden Greathouse, who's going to be amazing this year. All that being said, if they want to win a title in this current field, and if they want to get through and host a playoff game again, I would say their pass coverage is going to have to improve compared to last year. The corners, excellent, not really talking about them, it's just the defense overall. And even the corners, as excellent as they are, will probably be tested by the USC Trojans. Now we can talk about Ohio State and Matt Patricia, and whether or not his defense is going to completely reload from a legendary unit last year, or if there is going to be some regression. Michael Valadez, GBR, I'm ready for a 10-win season. Just wondering how Notre Dame's D will be. That is the subject. No. I mean, they should be good there. Notre Dame should have a good defense. But I think last year they were a bit of a paper tiger. And I think you saw that against USC and Ohio State, where you kind of had the, okay, we can play man against everyone. Like, okay, that's what it was. Those defenses that typically play man all the time were like, yeah, we're going to man up on you and we're not scared of you. When they meet NFL receivers, it's rough. It's so rough because the minute someone has an athletic edge over them, dead. I mean, that was the USC game. I know that USC threw 2 pick sixes, but that was a quarterback who barely started all season long, and they casually put up 35 points against that unit. Ohio State was doing really whatever they wanted through the air. I think it was the fact that Ohio State, for whatever reason, once again decided they wanted to run the ball a bunch as the game went on. And Ohio State, when they ran the ball when they tried to make their attack run first, no matter when they did that, outside of very early in the year, it never ended well. Because they didn't have the fortitude and the strength and the talent in the trenches to run the ball for 40 times in a game and have it consistently be successful. Like, against Notre Dame, they had that 170-yard carry by Judkins, but outside of that, they ran for 3.5 yards per carry against a Notre Dame running defense that, I mean, was good, but wasn't phenomenal. It wasn't. And after that Judkins run in the first half, they weren't running the ball super well. And that was against an injured Notre Dame defensive front, too. So I think that Notre Dame's defense last year was a bit of a paper tiger, and with how much they lose and the coordinator they lose, I would not be shocked if they experienced some significant regression this year. This is actually different from Ohio State's defense, because Ohio State's defense wasn't a paper tiger. So as questionable as questionable as I think Matt Patricia could be. I think a lot of people are immediately saying he'll be elite. I think there should be some caution thrown that way. When you have someone like him who's taken a break from play calling consistently for a long time, you should have some reservations there. But I think ultimately, as I'm going to talk about here, that he will work out. He'll succeed at Ohio State. By succeed, will he be as good as Knowles? I'm not going to lie to you and say yes. I would say that's almost impossible, if not impossible, given the fact that he's working with Knowles players, and Knowles took Ohio State's defense from Alex Grinch bad to like Jesse Minter defense good, the defenses that have been annoying Ohio State with Michigan forever. So, yeah, I think that Matt Patricia at Ohio State is much more likely, far more likely, to work out than Chris Ash at Notre Dame. Far more likely. Could be wrong, but I didn't love any of those hires, but I'd much rather have Matt Patricia with Ohio State's players, with his system, than Ash and what he... Because Ash, think about it this way too. When was the last time he was a defensive coordinator? Now, maybe Freeman will be involved in calling the defense a bit, but they lose enough to where I think that there's going to be some regression for sure. Let's talk about the Matt Patricia hire, though, and why I think it will work out for Ohio State. It is my belief now, I've been converted to the idea that the Silver Bullets are not going to regress too much under Matt Patricia. The defense, I think we have to be honest and say it's not going to be as good as last year's unit. There's too much lost production, and Knowles was known to be the number one defensive coordinator in all of college football last year for a reason. Bless me. After all, Ryan Day said that. However, I believe that Matt Patricia will work out at Ohio State, and I think he will field great defenses in his tenure, whether it's just a year, whether it is 2 years. I think that at the end of the day, the defense is going to do its job. They're not going to be the reason why Ohio State loses games, the sole reason why, like the defenses in 2021 and to a lesser degree in the 2020 year, the COVID year. Though I will give some grace for the COVID year, defenses across the board were pretty atrocious that season. But the Matt Patricia hire will work out for Ohio State, and here's why that is. And I want to play a game of two truths and a lie in relationship to why I believe Patricia will work. So here are the two truths and a lie. Matt Patricia will be better than Jim Knowles. This defense is among the most talented in America by blue chip ratio and by development. And Patricia's style of aggression works when on average you have superior athletes or equivalent athletes to whichever team you are facing on any given Saturday or Friday or any day of the week, factoring in the playoff games and wherever New Year's falls. Forget where it falls this year. Those are the two truths and a lie. And I think it's pretty obvious which are true and which is a lie. And the fact that even two of those statements are true would result in Matt Patricia succeeding at Ohio State in fielding pretty damn good defenses. So the truths are that this defense is among the most talented, not just by recruiting, but Knowles, who was the nation's best defensive coordinator, I think is the nation's best defensive coordinator still. Ryan Day said that at the national title ceremony, knowing full and well that he was going off to Penn State, and shouted him out for helping him rebuild the Silver Bullets into what they are now, a monster. Patricia is dealing with the roster that Knowles built and developed, and that several amazing position coaches. So you got Larry Johnson, you have James Laurinaitis, Matt Guerrieri, Tim Walton, and other quality controller assistant coaches to the assistant coaches, for example, like what Alan Clark, now at Texas, was for Larry Johnson last year on the defensive line. You have great development there and just natural given talent, and they've used the portal well on that side of the ball, for example. So Caleb Downs last year, wonderful addition. I think that Bo Atkinson this year was a good addition, not just for this year, but he'll probably come back in 2026, I would venture. And they'll also be more talented than the majority of defenses they play on any given Saturday. And that combined with Patricia's aggressive style means they are going to overwhelm a lot of offenses that they play. It will take a great quarterback with above average at minimum, if not good, great skill position players and strong trenches to move this defense. The lie here is I don't think, as some have said, no, he's not better than Knowles, but he doesn't have to be. Again, Ohio State is the number one blue chip ratio in college football. They have several top 100 players currently on the roster, many of whom have several years in the program. They've lost their black stripes. Look, the Ohio State recruiting news that's going around right now, that affects the long-term future if the bad news continues for several cycles, which is probably unlikely. In the here and now, this is a top 3, if not top 2 talent roster per the team talent composite that has yet to be released. And per blue chip ratio, it's the best roster. Blue chip ratio isn't gospel, but it is a tool. The fact that in one analytic you are number 1 is pretty phenomenal. And that, plus a player in Caleb Downs, a linebacker group including Arvell Reese, who I think will be an All-American, Sonny Styles is a preseason All-American, Peyton Pierce, who should be an honorable mention, if not better caliber Big Ten player, with the aggressive style, the multiple formations with a player in Caleb Downs and a player in Sonny Styles and Reese, really that defensive backfield who is more experienced than the front, and I'm counting the linebackers in that backfield, intelligent, proven, experienced vets in those key positions, guys with the green sticker, the best players. Having them in this defense, I think, will confuse offenses, will break offenses mentally and physically. You're going to see an area where I think this defense could improve compared to Knowles' defense is you could see them generate more turnovers, I think. Now, there is a cost to that, but I want to focus on the positives here. You could see more defensive touchdowns. You could see overwhelmingly more interceptions. Wouldn't be shocked if those things were the case. Not going to exactly predict them in this segment. But Patricia will work out at Ohio State for those reasons. And I think that whether he goes back to the NFL or decides, hey, I like this college job. I like recruiting. I like being in a different environment. Why not stick around here for a bit? I think that he is going to ultimately work out. Ohio State's minus 320 to reach the playoffs. They're the favorites to win the Big Ten with an over-under win total of 10.5. Here are a few of the only offenses I could see challenging this defense. So Grambling State, Ohio, Minnesota, you're excluded. Same with Purdue and UCLA. Like those 5, Ohio State's probably going to hold the single digits with this defense. I would say that Illinois and Wisconsin and Rutgers, as much as they have talent in some areas, if those teams win, it's because this entire video is wrong and Patricia is a disaster, or more likely than that, the offense is clunky and gives these teams, many of whom have good special teams units, not Minnesota, but Illinois, Wisconsin, and Rutgers do, good special teams units, good enough offenses to maybe burn this defense once or twice, and also good enough defensive players to take advantage of maybe some of Ohio State's offensive clunkiness. If any of those games are close or an upset, I wouldn't blame the defense in those games. I think that would be very unlikely. Now, outside of Penn State, Michigan, and Texas, the big 3 games where those teams could be good enough, I think Penn State and Texas will be good enough. We'll see on Michigan, where they could beat Ohio State on either side of the ball. The other team is Washington. I think with what Washington has at the skill positions and quarterback, especially if the offensive line is just better than it was last year, they could test this defense. But outside of them and the 3 biggest games, and in your big games, even if you have an elite defense, even if you have an elite offense, we've seen before with Ohio State, with other teams, Michigan, with Penn State, we've even seen this with USC when USC was awesome under Pete Carroll, and I imagine we'll see it in the future when I think USC is awesome again. We've seen it with Oregon, with Georgia. In big games, even your awesome side of the ball can be pushed around. It just can. So when I look at the talent, when I observe and analyze it and see what Patricia's body of work is and what he is inheriting here, I ultimately lean more confident than I do unconfident. This is not like Chris Ash at Notre Dame, where I have some very serious concerns and I'm not picking that. Originally, I had more concerns for Patricia than Hartline. I would now flip those. I just don't think concerns about Hartline are a massive deal, because if he comes out and isn't working as a play caller, Day can take over and has several games to take over and get back in the groove of things. So Patricia will pan out, trust Ohio State's staff there, and I think this defense, while it won't be as good as last year's defense, and I don't think it'll be as nearly impressive as the unit in the playoffs last year, which was epic, a generational type performance there. It will be a great near elite, if not bordering on elite unit. And that, with Ohio State's offense, should be good enough to compete for a national championship this season. Now, I want to move on to a unit with a ton of potential. Let me just reply to my graphic designer here. Move on to a unit with a ton of potential. And then after that, how much do we have here? I know I spent more time than I probably should have on my... I think I spent more time than I should have on the Kansas State-Iowa State video, because we're already at an hour. Didn't want to be at an hour for this show, because I got to eat before the Corn Crazed live. So at 8, we're going to have a hard get off. Even if we have remaining content that I haven't gotten to, I'll just I'll change the cover and we'll talk about those things tomorrow. Let me see. Thoughts on Sareveld winning both Winter and Summer Iron Buckeye, and people saying he's developed into OSU's best O-lineman. I, at this point, believe it. So here's the reason why I believe that. I believe that because from what I understand, Ohio State's defensive ends aren't really getting the best of the offensive tackles. So the offensive tackles for Ohio State are winning consistently enough, by my understanding, to where I can actually believe the reports that, yeah, Saraveld's doing pretty well. Because their DNs are good. So if he's performing well against the DNs, then I imagine that means he's pretty damn good. It's interesting because I don't really trust the reports coming out of Ohio State's camp about their trench play. I think a lot of it's what they want to see. But one thing I do trust about that position is Sareveld. I think Ohio State's going to be totally fine at tackle. Tackle isn't their question. It's going to be the inside once again. So the news about one day Luke Montgomery, Carson Hinsman, and Tegra Shabola are all-American players shoving the D-line, and that means they're the Joe Moore Award winner. And then the next day, Caden McDonald's pushing him back 5 yards. That's not good news. That's not indicative of a unit on either side. I mean, maybe both of them are elite, but given all they've lost, I kind of doubt that as much as the defensive tackle unit lost, that they're going to be as good as they were last year. D-end and D-tackle lost a ton. They're not as good there as they were last year. They're younger. Their star rating out of high school isn't as high. They're undergoing somewhat of a scheme change, even though there are some similarities. I just don't... And the staff's also been saying for eons that they don't like the D-tackle depth. So I don't know. Just something to think about. Let me talk about Oregon's DBs, though, and then we'll actually get on out of here. So I'm going to edit this cover here. Yeah, I got to do a better job of setting time limits, but we did a good job last stream. It's okay that we went a little bit over for this stream. Okay, let's get to Oregon's defensive backs, and then we'll get on out of here. I love the Oregon secondary this year, and I am going to tell you why. They bring in Dylan Thieneman, who with superior coaching and a better supporting cast should excel in Tosh Lupoi and Dan Lanning's defense. The Oregon defensive front is strong, particularly at edge and defensive end, and I like linebacker as well. So the Oregon defensive backs should have some help in pass defense with Mateo Uyunglele and Tatum Tuioti getting to quarterbacks. That, along with the schedule and how much of the early games are against inferior competition, tells me that this younger secondary, with some experienced players, but some younger guys as well, should be able to get precious snaps for younger players, including some true freshmen who could potentially see the field, and certainly some redshirt freshmen, and ease them into the game. And the biggest reason I love this secondary is because all of them outside of Theron Johnson are 6 foot or higher. This is a taller, longer, more talented in terms of blue chip ratio, size, and development secondary than what Oregon had last season. I think by the end of the year, this Oregon secondary will be a better secondary than what they had last year. Now, you have to look on defense overall and factor in what they lost at D tackle. They're probably not going to be as good there. They'll definitely be better at D end. Linebackers, I would say a push at this point. Love that Betra comes back. We'll see who else steps up there. When focusing on this secondary, Jalil Florence comes back from injury, so you have a vet there. Thieneman transfers in from Purdue. Johnson, the boundary side corner, transfers in from Northwestern, so you have vets there. Dalen Austin and Kingston Lopa didn't play all that much, but Kingston Lopa is a linebacker. That's what he was out of high school. Transitioned to safety. He's like, I think 6'4", 6'5", 200 pounds. He's built. I think he'll excel at safety with the right development. Dalen Austin played some at nickel last year. Another player who is bigger than the prototypical Oregon defensive back from 2024. I love that this unit brings in several Big Ten players like Thieneman and Johnson, who were some of the better players on their defenses last season. Thieneman, along with Will Helt, was the best at Purdue, and Theron Johnson was one of the best at Northwestern. So this is a unit that's a nice balance of experience and also upside and just raw talent. And you also see that in the two deep, where Oregon, they brought in Trey McNutt, true freshman, top 100 player. Unfortunately, he broke his leg, so he's out for the year. They still have, though, Naeem Offord at corner. I could see him entering the field for parts of this season. Brandon Finney Jr., Dorian Brew are highly talented. Ife Obadegwu is in the two deep as a redshirt freshman. Siona Laole is a redshirt junior transfer in the corner depth chart. These are players who are, again, taller, longer, more talented. I love what I'm seeing out of these corners, and I think that with how many young players are involved, redshirt freshmen or freshmen that will be in Oregon's two deep or playable depth, I think this defense is going to get better and better and better as the year goes on. Next year, with how much they should return, I'm going to be very excited to see what that unit's all about, because they're going to be much older next year, much more experienced. But let's focus on this year. They also brought in Jaden Kannady from Ole Miss. He'll be the reserve nickel this season. I think having Ife Obadegwu, given what we've heard out of camp and what I've seen in studying his recruiting profile, he's going to excel. There is some depth here, along with tons of starting experience, a lot of talent. I love this unit because of those things. And again, also because of how it aligns with Oregon's schedule. It'd be one thing if they opened up and played, Texas, Ohio State, Penn State, USC, like in week one, and if they did it on the road, that would be one thing. But they get Montana State in week one, Oklahoma State week 2, at Northwestern, who's a limited Big Ten team in week 3, Oregon State at home week 4. Their first game against a team who will be even close to them in terms of power ratings is week 5, September 27th at Penn State. Very tough task, but you get a few games to prepare for that, to warm up for that, to game plan for that, and to get backup players and some starters who haven't played a lot before valuable reps and playing time. Oregon is this team who I like more than anyone else to make a massive jump from week 1 to the end of the year. Now, I think they're going to start off the year pretty rough. I will preface that. Not rough as in losing games left and right, but it's going to be a lot like last year, where after that Idaho game and Boise State game, a lot of people permanently wrote Oregon off until they beat Ohio State. I think it's going to be a lot like that, potentially to even a worse degree, because of how much they're losing from last year's team to this year's team. And then after Penn State, this secondary, I think it could be challenged a little bit, could be, by Indiana or Rutgers or Wisconsin with what they have at receiver, especially challenged by what USC and Washington have at receiver. But they will get better as the year goes on, and with the talent and athleticism and experience that some of those players and the talent that really all of them have. You're not playing football at Oregon if you weren't talented. Dan Lanning has changed that for sure. I imagine they're going to win some battles against some of these better wide receiver groups. And this secondary, by year's end, is going to be night and day different from kickoff against Montana State. And that with what they have at defensive end and linebacker and the size and talent they have at defensive tackle, could this Oregon defense be a superior unit to last year's Oregon defense? We'll have to see about that. But there is a chance of that, and the fact I'm even saying that I think is a positive indictment, if that's even a phrase, of Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoy and their recruiting and their development on that side of the ball for the Oregon Ducks. Okay, we're out of here. Wish I could stay on more, but I'm going to be on a show with Corn Crazed in 30 minutes. So I have to eat and shove down some food and get ready for that. I will see you all very soon. Have a great day. Be here. We're going to be live tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Will probably be a longer show with more packed in topics than this show, but be there. Thank you very much. Have a great